need a high-end designer or a lot of money to get a luxe look. Be your own interior designer.
This is Affordable Interior Design, the podcast.
Here's your host, Betsy Helmuth.
My next question comes all the way from Encinitas, California. And Mark is writing in. He writes, Betsy, I'm in search for replacement shutters for the exterior of my bungalow. I discovered a website called architecturaldepot.com. They have really interesting materials like crown moldings, medallions, 3D wall panels, faux beams, fretwork, slat wall kits, columns, and really just all sorts of decorative things I've never heard of and mostly can't spell. I'm particularly drawn to the woodwork applied to the walls. I don't hear you talk about any of these types of changes. Is that because they're not affordable, you don't like them, or maybe it just really doesn't fall into interior design? I'm curious on your opinions. I'm just a curious dude trying to learn a bit. I love your podcast. Well, Mark, thanks for being curious. Thanks for writing in. Yes, I do have strong opinions. So, first of all, a lot of people were applying shiplap or 2x4s to their walls in either an accent wall treatment or all over because that was all the rage back with Chip and Joanna Gaines and even at the tail end or maybe the beginning of that modern farmhouse movement, right? With like Studio McGee, etc. I worry that that's super trendy. I worry that it's here today, gone tomorrow. I do like it in a seaside cottage. I do like it in certain applications. And in other applications, I think it's contrived, oppositional to the architecture, and trendy. And so that's why I was never a fan of shiplap. I knew it would have its moment, and its moment is already done, gone. All right. Now, a lot of people right now, just tons and tons of people, find themselves with big walls that go up like 3 stories or different things like that. And they want to do architectural moldings as features rather than artwork or something like that. So they are putting trim in rectangular formations and squares. They are using the 2x4s to create grids, right? That's very popular right now called board and batten. There's a lot of this, and it is the new shiplap. I'm just telling you right now, it's going to look somewhat dated soon. And people are trying to give these kind of empty, blank, contemporary spaces that sometimes weren't well thought out by architects and sometimes are just kind of sterile because they do lack interior architecture detailing. They're just trying to give it some personality. And I see the issue, right? Especially of a lover of historic homes, because I intrinsically have a ton of ornate woodwork and a ton of, architectural interest. And that's why I sought out a house like this versus artificially imposing it onto sort of a blank canvas. That being said, sometimes I like it and sometimes I don't. And the bottom line is I answer the questions that come in. I don't think in all these years I've ever skipped a question or not answered one. I mean, you guys can challenge me. I'm sure somebody will write something inappropriate or weird one day, but they've all been quite appropriate and I've been eager to answer them all. So it's not that I'm avoiding talking about these things. It's that I don't personally love them. So I don't just bring them up on my own. And then people just aren't asking me about them. But you are asking me about them. And this is how I feel. I really hate it when people add random medallions or fretwork. Sometimes I hate it when they add beams if it feels like it's not congruous with the architecture. Adding columns, especially to an interior of a room that doesn't need support, just kind of changes the flow in terms of a floor plan and doesn't add much visually, in my opinion. It just limits us in terms of furniture placement. I do, however, this is the one thing where I'm going to put asterisks and have a caveat. I do think that there are spaces that really benefit from crown molding. I do think crown molding is one of those things that you can put in a more transitional type space or even certainly traditional type space, and it can just bring the room to life and make it sing. That being said, a lot of people try and slap this stuff up on a very contemporary home with straight lines and doesn't look organic to the architecture, even though it better aligns with their particular style. But when people buy a house, when people are looking for a house, I warn that, this is another person, quote unquote, living in your home. And the architecture gets a say in the style that you should bring to the spaces. And should it dominate the room? Absolutely not. If I let the architecture dominate the room in my home, I would only be working with antiques. But I'm going to honor it by folding in some antiques, things I've never had an appreciation for in the past, nor have I ever purchased for my home, while folding it in with something I'm quite familiar with and have a deep love for, which is mid-century modern. And by layering those two pieces throughout, I'm placating my desire to have mid-century modern, and I'm honoring the house's personality by leaning into those more ornate old world items. It's complicated, Mark. And so it's not an across the board no, but those are my real feelings on everything you mentioned. Guys, do you want to hear my real feelings on something you're thinking about? It's so easy. Just go to affordableinteriordesign.com/podcast and send your question in today. I'll be right back with you next week answering more burning questions. If you are curious like Mark, let me know. Until then, bye. A big thank you to Aton and the Embassy who wrote our theme song. A shout out to Catherine Heller who owns the podcast shop and is our editor extraordinaire. We also want to thank Ginny Sunasan and her team at the Savvy Podcast Agency for their help with our social, our YouTube channel, and so much more. We also want to thank Uploft, which is our parent company who supports this podcast. And lastly, we owe a huge debt of gratitude to you. Thank you so much for tuning in and for all your support.